Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahabati ajma'in. Allahumma inni nawaitu at-ta'allum wa ta'lim wa at-tadhakkura wa at-tadhkir wa al-naf'a wa al-intifa' wa al-ifadata wa al-istifada wa al-hatha ala tamassuki bi kitabillahi wa sunnati rasulihi sallallahu alayhi wa sallama والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم يا الله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. So it's a distinct blessing to begin a text, a new text, a text that was, what's in fact a letter that was written by one of the greatest of our scholars, someone whose works that we've been speaking about, looking at over the past couple of years. Even the book of assistance that we took in the first year that we read is also a text that al-Imam al-Haddad rahimahullah ta'ala, that he bases it on the works of al-Imam al-Ghazali. And so we have this text in front of us, the title of which is Ayyuhal Walad, and we'll go through all what relates to the title of the work itself. But what I thought we'll do, we can just go straight into the text, because the text itself explains the reason why the Imam wrote this letter, because it's a letter, that's what it is. And then we can get to Bismillah. Now, so Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, wa bihi nasta'een. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen, was salatu was salamu ala nabiyyihi Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. So for those of you who have this text, it's on page 2 and page 3. I know the lesson's going to go well today, because we have someone very special with us today. Maulana Mansoor, Allah bless you. When you see good people, you should make dua. I can tell you right now that they're accepted. So, the Imam, this is not where the text begins. This is just a preamble to explain the purpose behind why the Imam wrote this text. And so this first page, which is page 2 of the edition that you have, is just an explanation of why the Imam has written this letter. And so we'll read the Arabic, because I do want to read the Arabic text as we go through, primarily for the blessings that are contained in the words of the Imam. And then, as you'll see, it has a facing English, and then English translation, and then we'll try to comment on it where we can. So, Bismillah, the explanation begins where it says i'lam, but just as a point of note, students of knowledge are ordinarily advised that if you're reading a text, because in the halaqat of knowledge, in the circles of knowledge, a student normally reads the text. So you'll say, look, you have the text and you read, and the teacher explains. That's how it works in Sham and other places. And so if it's the teacher that's reading, if it's a student that's reading, then out of adab, you don't say i'lam. In Arabic it means know, because it's sort of like saying to your teacher, because you're the one, you're addressing him. And so what they say, you should say it in a third person, which is wal yu'lam, let it be known. So rather than saying no, i.e. my teacher, that one of the advanced students devoted himself, etc., you say let it be known that it's a beautiful piece of advice that our teachers give us in how we should read when we read to our teachers. So وَلْيُعْلَمْ أَنَّ وَاحِدًا مِنَ الطَّلَبَةِ الْمُتَقَدِّمِينَ لَازَمَ خِدْمَةَ الشَّيْخِ الْإِمَامِ زَيْنِ الدِّينِ حجة الإسلام أبي حامد بن محمد الغزالي قدس الله روحه. That let it be known that one of the advanced students who had devoted himself to the service of the master. Now what's interesting here is the word is lazima. And lazima is important because in our tradition, we speak about how you should structure and undertake your studies, and it's whether you should have a particular curriculum or whether you go through an order of books, which is all important. But the most important thing that you can do is have what's called mulazama with your shaykh, which basically in Arabic, lazima, yalzamu, one of its meanings is that you stick tightly to someone and don't let them go. In fact, in logic, luzum is this necessary implication between two things. You can't separate them. And the idea being is that you shouldn't separate yourself from your teacher, because one of the things that you're learning from your teacher that's teaching you is not just the fact of reading a book, it's reading and coming to understand how to read that book. Because you need to learn the skills of how to read text properly. There's a whole range of skills that a student of knowledge needs to acquire to be able to progress in their studies. And so it's interesting that the person who's written this introduction to the Risala says that this advanced student lazama al-Imam, that it's essentially was inseparable from him, right? And look at who he's inseparable from: Shaykh al-Imam Zainuddin Hujjat al-Islam Abi Hamid bin Muhammad al-Ghazali qaddasallahu ruhahu. There's only one Imam in our entire deen that has the title Hujjat al-Islam. No other Imam in our deen has that title, no one else. And anyone who reads his works will well come to know why that's the case. Because what you'll see in the Imam's works is that he lives in the 5th Islamic century. He was born in 450 Hijri and he passes in 505. So he lived a very short life, 55 years old. It's a very short life. And by his time, he recognizes that there's things that have started to go wrong. 900 years ago, he sees that there's things that have started to go wrong. People are saying things about the deen that they shouldn't be saying. People are studying the sciences of the deen in a way that they shouldn't be studying them. The scholars have misunderstood the purpose of why we even engage in all of this study. We've got attacks from different groups that are claiming to know the truth. We have the influence of Ibn Sina, who was a huge figure prior to Imam Ghazālī, and people are now reading his works. You have people of, at that time, what were the turuq of tasawwuf, or people who are claiming to have tasawwuf, saying things which were perhaps not entirely in accordance with what we would see as being part of the deen. So there's lots going on. Now, how many individual people do you need to have to take on that? No, look, when we study for this reason. Any science that you're going to study, whether it's fiqh, hadith, this is the reason why you do it. And so, if you need an individual, how many individuals you need to be able to push back against people who are saying something about fiqh, hadith, the philosophers, tasawwuf, any science you can imagine. The Imam himself undertakes this task and he presents an understanding of the deen as it came down to us from the Salaf, from the great forebears of this ummah, from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. And the fact that one person was able to do that is partly the reason why he's referred to as Hujjat al-Islam, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. Imam Subki, the great Damascene scholar, he said about al-Imam al-Ghazali, normally when you praise a scholar in the books, they'll say, Lam yura mithluhu, that no one saw the like of this person. Right? It's just a way of praising that person, right? Imam Subki says about Imam al-Ghazali, Lam yara al-Ghazaliyu ahadan mithlahu, that Imam al-Ghazali never saw anyone like himself. Now, that might seem like a statement of, well, you shouldn't really say those things. But it's really just a factual statement about who the Imam was. Now, maybe we can temper it a little bit by saying, well, who was the source, if you like, the spring of his knowledge? Al-Imam al-Ghazali, the great Imam al-Haramain, Abu al-Mu'ali al-Juwayni. Now, again, just as Imam Ghazali, there's no scholar in the deen that has the laqab, if you like, of Hujjat al-Islam. No one's called Hujjat al-Islam apart from him. Likewise, no one is referred to as Imam al-Haramain except al-Imam al-Juwayni, and that's his teacher. And he only ever had that teacher. He didn't need anyone else. Imam Ghazali was approximately 27 or 28 years old when Imam Juwayni left this world. He never had a teacher after that. That's it. And so you can see the type of ocean that Al-Imam Juwayni must have been to have produced the sort of ocean that Imam Ghazali became. And in fact, Imam Juwayni, when he recognized the brilliance of Al-Imam al-Ghazali, what does he say? He said that Ghazali is like an ocean that you can't get to the bottom of it. Ghazali is like that's his teacher saying this about his student. And again, like I say, we don't really hear much about Al-Imam al-Juwayni, but I can assure you that he's one of the most important key figures in our deen. Right? And he's recognizing that here's an individual, his knowledge is of an extent that you can't even reach the bottom of it. Right? So what you'd want to do in following on from this is to look for those great teachers. If you really want to study, because if you look at the lives of the great scholars, they didn't just stay in one place. Meaning, sometimes we think, let's stay in Walthamstow and knowledge will come to our door. That's never how knowledge has worked. Knowledge has worked by going to the people that have the knowledge. So if we really want it, it's upon us to go and look for these great, because they still exist. I can tell you right now, they still exist in far-flung parts of the world. I've heard places in Afghanistan to this day have madaris that they still read the Masail of Imam Razi, right? Places in Iraq and places in the Yemen and the Maghrib and many parts of Africa that we probably haven't even heard of, the Sudan, Allah protect it, right? So this idea of mulazama is key. And look, the fact that this student had mulazama with the Shaykh, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, Hujjat al-Islam, واشتغل بتحصيل وقراءة العلم عليه حتى جمع من دقائق العلوم واستكمل فضائل النفس. And so his mulazama, this sort of intimate companionship that he had with Imam Ghazali, continued until the point that he came to, as the translation tells us, that he had mastered the details of the sciences. دقائق العلوم. Meaning he spent so much time with a great mind, how can you not? But also importantly, it's not that he had mastered the sciences, but also that he had, as he says in the translation, filled out the good qualities of the soul. وَاسْتَكْمَلَ فَضَائِلَ النَّفْسِ. Again, we'll come into all of this, but we'll just read the introduction. ثُمَّ إِنَّهُ تَفَكَّرَ يَوْمًا فِي حَالِ نَفْسِهِ وَخَطَرَ عَلَى بَالِهِ وَقَالَ. And so one day he just started to reflect, and he reflected on his own soul. And it occurred to him, and he said, إِنِّي قَرَأْتُ أَنْوَاعًا مِنَ الْعُلُومِ وَصَرَفْتُ رَيْعَانَ عُمْرِي عَلَى تَعَلُّمِهَا وَجَمْعِهَا. That I have studied various kinds of sciences, and I've spent my life learning and mastering them. I now must find out which kind of all the sciences that I've studied will be of most use to me tomorrow. وَالْآنْ يَنْبَغِي لِي أَنْ أَعْلَمْ أَيُّ نَوْعِهَا يَنْفَعُنِي غَدًا وَيُؤْنِسُنِي فِي قَبْرِي. And which one is going to comfort me in my grave? Because you've studied all of this, which one of all these sciences are going to comfort me in the grave? وَأَيُّهَا لَا يَنْفَعُنِي حَتَّى أَتْرُكَهُ كَمَا قَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ اللَّهُمَّ إِنِّي أَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنْ عِلْمٍ لَا يَنْفَعُ. And so that I can come to know which sort of knowledge is going to benefit me and which sort of knowledge is not going to benefit me, so I can leave that type. Because as the Prophet ﷺ said, I seek refuge in you, O Allah, from knowledge that does not benefit, or any knowledge which is not useful. Because you can have knowledge which has no use to it, or it's not beneficial. It has a use, I beg your pardon, but it's not beneficial. An example would be learning magic, or learning the talismans which are of the disliked variety, and those sorts of things, right? The type of knowledge that, as Imam refers to in Ihya Ulumuddin, that separates between a husband and a wife. It's knowledge, but it's harmful knowledge. So we must recognize that just as there's knowledge that is beneficial, there's knowledge which is not beneficial. And in our day and age, we can see, what's that thing that we said, that the native Indians, whenever they would make a decision that concerned communities, they would try to look at the consequences of their actions 7 generations down. 7 generations down, right? We don't know, for instance, that the mines today that have produced a soap that we wash our hands with, what that's doing to us. Or the plastic that our water comes in, what it's doing, right? Or the paint that we have on our walls, it has chemicals. We think the fact that it's readily available and we buy it, that must mean there's nothing wrong with it. No, there's never been any studies done on this. Who knows, 100 years from now, they might look back and think, why did these people never get up and say, we need to see if this plastic is okay for our health, or whether the paint that's on the walls is actually good for us because we're breathing it in, right? Or the sedentary lifestyle that we live. I know that's not something that's manufactured, but the point being is that there's things that great minds produce today. If you can, I'm using the word great in a broad sense. How can a great mind produce weapons of mass destruction? How can a great mind produce? Do you know in the Vietnam War they had what's called napalm, and they realized that napalm was if the Viet Cong had jumped into the to lakes, it would rub off. And so they developed water-resistant napalm. I mean, what kind of a mind is it that's clearly, in some sense, brilliant? Oppenheimer, clearly a brilliant mind, but the fact that you've produced something. So what we're trying to say here is that any knowledge that we're trying to acquire, we must think of what are the consequences of that knowledge. Where is it going to take us? What will happen in 10 years, 20 years, 100 years from now? Do we really want to go there? And I do believe that if you look at the ancients and those who came before us, they had a markedly different understanding of consequence than what we do. I think that they would stop themselves and prevent themselves from maybe accessing or maybe cultivating new forms of what we would call progress today, because they saw that the detriment in this was a lot more, right? So then he says in the introduction, فاستمرت هذه الفكرة حتى كتب إلى حضرة الشيخ حجة الإسلام محمد al-Ghazali رحمه الله تعالى استفتاء وسأله مسائل والتمس نصيحة ودعاء. And so this idea that this student of knowledge he was having about himself, this thought persisted to the point that he wrote to his Shaykh. He wrote to his Shaykh, the proof of Islam, Muhammad al-Ghazali, may Allah have mercy on him, seeking a ruling as well as asking a question and requesting both advice and a prayer. So he's in this book, you'll see the final chapter is that he says to the Imam, also send me a dua that I can make. And the final chapter of this book is of this risala, of this letter, I beg your pardon, is the dua that the Imam writes for him. Even though وإن كان مصنفات الشيخ كالإحياء وغيره تشتمل على جواب مسائل. So he says, I know that the books that the Imam has written, such as the Ihya Ulumuddin and others, they contain the answers to my questions. I know that. لكن مقصودي أن يكتب الشيخ حاجتي في ورقات تكون معي مدة حياتي. But I want the Shaykh to write something specific for my need. Every student wants that from their teacher, right? You know, he wants his Shaykh to write something specifically for him. A few pages that he says that I can keep with me for the rest of my life, and I will act in accordance with what is in them during my life, if Allah the Exalted wills. بما فيها مدة عمري إن شاء الله تعالى. فكتب الشيخ هذه الرسالة إليه في جوابه. And so the Shaykh, al-Imam al-Ghazali, wrote this letter to him in response. So this book, I keep calling it a book, this thing in front of us, it's a letter to his student. And they've given it the reason why we probably call it a book is because it's called Ayyuhal Walad. But it's taken from the fact that if you look at every passage, it starts with Ayyuhal Walad, Ayyuhal Walad, Ayyuhal Walad, dear child, dear child. Now, just a terminological point here that walad in Arabic doesn't mean boy, it means child. And so Ayyuhal Walad, it's an endearing term, dear child. But what's really interesting is that not only is the title evident of the manner in which a teacher should show the qualities of endearment to their student. You know, you should refer to them with loving titles. You'll see that teachers often call their students Shaykh. Why? Out of encouragement for them, they'll refer to them as Shaykh, right? Or something, or Maulana, or some endearing title they'll call them. They'll never call their students, very rarely, by their first name. When I say their students, I mean those who are actually studying with them. And so it's not only it's a term of endearment, but there's an additional point here, which is that the importance of the teacher as a parent, as a kind of parent, because this is something that a father or a mother would say to their child, Ayyuhal Walad, right? So we have to ask ourselves this question that, this is similar to how a parent would address a child. Why is that? Why is the Imam using this particular term? And so as the Imam tells us in the Ihya Ulum ad-Din, in the first book, that in a very important sense, the teacher has a role which is even more important than a biological parent, right? In fact, the Imam refers to the teacher in the Ihya as not as a muallim, but as a murshid. He says al-murshid al-muallim. He doesn't say al-muallim. Al-muallim is a teacher. He says al-murshid al-muallim. In other words, the primary quality that you're looking for in a teacher is that he is a murshid, which basically means someone who's guiding you to rushd, right, to the right path, keeping you steady on it. If your teacher doesn't have that quality, then they're not a teacher in a sense of, in fact, we can say that in the modern world, that's the function of the teacher. They're not a murshid anymore. In fact, if anyone's a teacher, he'll see that when you do a PGCE training, are you trained you're trained to care for students, don't get me wrong, but are you a murshid? Are you telling them what's right for them and what's wrong for them in terms of ethically, morally? No, spiritually. There's no responsibility. In fact, it's the case that since the 18th century in Europe, 18th, 19th century, that role of the teacher, which was like a parent, was separated. You're only a teacher. Your function is just to instruct in information and knowledge. To take care of their spirit has nothing to do with you. But our tradition is entirely different. Our tradition is a tradition where the teacher is like your parent. And as I said, in an important way, more important than your parent, because there's a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّمَا أَنَا لَكُمْ مِثْلُ الْوَالِدِ لِوَلَدِهِ, that I am as a parent is to you, I am to you as a parent is to their child. And he is the al-murshid al-muallim, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so what Imam Ghazālī is telling us here is that the intent is of salvation in the hereafter, which is more important than the parent saving them from the fire of the dunya, right? That the responsibility of the muallim, in a sense, that the parents are a reason a child was brought into existence into this temporary world. Right? The parents are the reason why a child is brought into existence in a temporary world, but the teacher is the reason for a child being taken out of this temporary world and into the eternal, never-ending world. So if we put it differently, we can say that the parents bring a child into the transient world, and the teacher takes a child out of the transient world into the permanent world. So if you look at it from that perspective, We're not saying overall, but in that perspective, who becomes more important then? Of course, the teacher in that sense. Right? But as I said, the Imam makes it very clear that it's not just any teacher, it's a teacher that's a murshid, the one who guides us to what's correct for us in the dunya and the akhirah. But these aren't just the other, because a teacher has responsibilities. The first responsibility that the teacher has is that they must follow in the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ. That's the beginning and the end. That they must be emulators of the prophetic teaching. Nothing stands above it. And we'll see that in a second here, that the Imam immediately goes into this idea when he begins his advice. That the teacher must never withhold anything from his student unnecessarily. So say you're teaching someone and you have some knowledge that's going to benefit them, but you just don't want to share it with them. For no reason. You just don't want to give it to them. They say that you can never do that with your students. Why? Because would a parent withhold food from their child unnecessarily? No. So why would a teacher who's like a parent withhold the food of a student, which is knowledge? Right? Or as the Imam tells us that a teacher should never scold a student. Firstly, a teacher should never harm a student of theirs. Should never lay their hands on I think I mentioned this last week. And min bab awla, as they say, it stands to reason even more so that a teacher should never speak in a way that's unbecoming, never scold a student. And what they say is that the teacher should rather teach the student through by intimating things. What's an example? By hinting, by implying. Why? Because by doing that, what you're actually doing is that you're sharpening the student's mind. Because if you tell the student directly, oh, you have to don't do this, it will be confronted in a way that it doesn't like, potentially. But if you sort of say in a roundabout way, and I said this to some of our brothers a few weeks ago, that there was a teacher and he noticed that one of his students was sleeping quite a lot. And so he didn't want to tell him directly that, look, don't sleep. It's not good especially for a student of knowledge. Right? And so he said in Urdu, he said, Sona mardon ke liye haram hai. Now, what's sona in Urdu? It has a dual meaning, doesn't it? It means sleeping and gold. And it's true, gold is impermissible for men. So look what he just said something which is true in fiqh. That look, gold is impermissible. In Urdu, it basically means if he thought about it, he'll understand that the Shaykh is actually trying to tell me in a very nice way, look, you need to maybe sleep a little bit less. Right? So that's going to sort of sharpen the mind of the student as well, because what will happen to the student? They'll think, I worked it out. And it's going to encourage them and create love in their heart for the teacher. And also that one of the responsibilities of the teacher is not to disparage other people, other teachers, other disciplines. Your teacher shouldn't be the one behind closed doors that speaks about, well, behind closed doors or in front of people, it makes no difference. But sometimes you feel a bit intimate behind closed doors and you feel that you can, let the guard down, as they say. But a teacher should never be someone that disparages other scholars, other people, should never disparage other sciences. Let's say you're studying with someone who's very strong in fiqh and they disparage someone who's very strong in language. Fiqh is more important. And why say that? There's no need to say that. Right? In fact, it should be that you're recognizing that this is a team effort and we have to all play together. And so that's sort of the idea behind this, the term of endearment, ayyuhal walad. And so what we see is the Imam immediately goes straight into his piece of advice. And he says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, أيها الولد المحب العزيز. So again, the term of endearment, which is, dear child, beloved and precious child. Because muhib, there's a lot to say about the idea of muhib, someone who's beloved to you, because it's one of the greatest manifestations of your endearment to somebody, to say that they're beloved to you. Because the greatest form of, because what's the name of the Prophet ﷺ? Al-Habib. So if you're a muhib, right, then you fall in the category of those that you have a close endearment for, right? And so, what does the Imam say? Look, so in this first paragraph, there's three things. On page 5, I beg your pardon, page 5 in your text. There's 3 points here that the Imam's making. Number one, it's this beautiful term of endearment that we should use. Number two, immediately there's a dua. So the Imam's telling us the manner in which we have to speak. Speak politely and offer a dua immediately. May Allah bless you, may Allah increase you, whatever it may be. And what's the dua? Immediately, أَطَالَ اللَّهُ بَقَاءَكَ, that may Allah essentially give you a long life. Now, if you were to ask people in power what they would give so that they could have an extra 5 years, 10 years, how much would they give? They would give a lot for that. So the Imam is saying that there's only one person that can give you a long life, and that's Allah. But he's not just praying for a long life for this student of his. He's saying, I pray that Allah blesses you with a long life بِطَاعَتِهِ, in His obedience. Because what use is a good life if you're not obedient to Him? Right? So that's the first thing, that the dua is so relevant to this student, because the benefit that the student is going to bring other people, we want it to extend for as long as it can, and that can come by giving him having a long life, and it will come by him being worshipful and obedient, because the more obedient he is, the more beneficial that he is to people. وَسَلَكَ بِكَ سَبِيلَ أَحِبَّائِهِ, and may he lead you to the path of those he loves. That's what it is. And may he lead you to the path of those he loves. So that's number two. Number three, this is where it begins. أَنَّ مَنْشُورَ النَّصِيحَةِ يُكْتَبُ مِنْ مَعْدِنِ الرِّسَالَةِ. What's he saying immediately? The Imam's setting a frame. It's the first thing that we have to think about when we think about what are we supposed to do when someone asks us for nasihah. And I'll get to the idea of nasihah in a second. What is nasihah? But prior to that, nasihah can only come from the Prophet ﷺ. Because think about it for a minute. How do we come to know the things that we come to know in the world? I mean, we have lots of ideas in our head, right? Where do they come from? I mean, if you're a builder, you have an idea of how to build a house. Where did those ideas come from? Where did that knowledge come from? You saw someone doing it, didn't you? So in your mind, these ideas set in your mind. If you're working in, let's say, IT, where did your ideas come from? If you're a painter, say you like football, where did your ideas come from? Whatever it may be, we have to be able to trace back, where did our ideas come from? And the way that we get ideas and knowledge is the fact that Allah gave us eyes and ears and the senses. Because it's through the senses that we come to know about the external world. There's no other way. Right? I mean, primarily, I should say. So that's why it's so important to know that, where are we putting ourselves, who are we spending time with, which gatherings, which places are we in? Because that's what's going to build up. Now, if someone has been brought up, they don't know, they've never been taught anything about Islam. I'm talking about Muslims, by the way. They don't know prophetic teaching. They don't know anything about the teachings of the Quran, or not much. Where are their frames? Because something has replaced it in your mind. You're choosing to live your life in a particular way. You're choosing that my life, it's getting up in the morning, and it's either going to school, getting a qualification, and once I've got that qualification, I need to get a job, and once I get a job, I need to make sure that I get the house, and I get married, and I put my kids through the same grind that I did, and then when I get to 65, I'll retire, and I'll realize that they wasted my pension, so I need to keep working a bit more, and that's my life. Where did that idea come from? It's come from somewhere. Have we ever challenged where the idea came from? Have we ever challenged the fact that what we learn from our environments, we just take it. We accept it that this is, as they say, gospel. Why would we? Because everyone's doing it, right? But what the Imam is saying immediately is that أَنَّ مَنْشُورَ النَّصِيحَ يُكْتَبُ مِنْ مَعْدَنِ الرِّسَالَةِ. Look, your frames they must and can only be taken from the treasure of prophecy. If you want to know how to live your life, then you must look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ. There's no other place that you can go to fill in your frames. Now, what's interesting is that what is nasihah in Arabic? It has three letters: Noon, Sad, and Ha. Nasaha. Now, what's one of the meanings of nasaha in Arabic? One of the meanings is to sew a garment, to patch a garment. And the one who does that, a tailor, is referred to as a nasih, the ism fa'il. Now that's a fascinating and interesting meaning, that the word nasaha, the word that we use for counsel and advice, one of its meanings is to patch a garment. Now, why is that interesting? Because what does a tailor do? When you take a garment to a tailor to patch, the tailor must choose the correct thread. Because let's say you have an item of clothing and it's got a hole in it and it's patching. The tailor, if the tailor is proficient and skilled, the tailor will know that, first thing I need to do is make sure that the type of thread that I'm using is the correct thread that's going to suit this material. And then it has to see what's the exact color. Because these both look as if they're brown, this cloth and this screen, but in reality it's what's called mushakkak, right? They are distinct from one another. To get an exact match is not easy. He recognizes that. So he needs to choose a right thread that accords with the garment. He needs to choose a right color, and he needs to make sure that the patch is of a type that when you look at it, you can't tell it's a patch. It just blends into it, right? Now, what we don't do is that we don't go to a tailor with a garment that needs patching and we say to the tailor, can you do it now? Because what does that mean? That means you're not going to get a good patch. He's just going to say, okay, look, I have this and there's these threads that are here, and look, I'll just quickly do it. He's not paid any attention to what he has to do. He's going to put something together. So what we can see immediately is that there is a responsibility on the tailor, and there's a responsibility on the person who's taking the garment. The tailor's responsibility is to choose all of these materials and a thread and to do the work properly. In relation to the garment, if another person bought a garment, they're distinct. That patch doesn't work for that patch. You can't say, look, I just done this patch, let me go and do the same one on that patch. It doesn't work like that. No one will go back to this tailor. And what's the responsibility of the person taking the garment? Be patient. Give the tailor your goods. What does that mean? Give the tailor your goods. Give him what you want from him, and then come back when he is ready to give it back to you. But there's also another meaning of nasihah, which is of nasaha, which is a pure, clear honey. Honey that the impurities of the honey have been removed, right? Now, both of these meanings are exactly what nasihah, in a sense of advice, is. Because when you go to somebody, you're taking them your garment. What's the garment here? The thing that you're seeking advice about. And you're giving it to them and saying, look, think about this, please, for me. See what you can see in it. And the person who's the tailor, i.e. who's receiving these goods, which is any particular circumstance or scenario, what's their responsibility? To understand that this circumstance is specific to this person, and I need to carefully choose the thread and the color and the material that fits this person, not what fits me. Does it make sense to say, look, I would have done this and I should do this, and I think, no, you need to buy that person's shoes and put yourself in them. And understand, how are we meant to give that person, because when someone's asking for advice, they're unclear about something. You need to offer them that clarity of what they're looking for. And so what we're doing essentially is that if our advice is sound and relevant and sincere, what we've done is that we've fortified that person. Just as we fortified that garment. I mean, there was a hole in it, and now it's fortified. It doesn't exist anymore. We've filled it in, right? And you've fortified it and you strengthened it. And this is also very interesting. Why? Because in Arabic, the word for fortifying is hisn, which is the same three root letters as nasihah. It's amazing that the language tells us the relationship between the act of good advice and what you're doing to the person. In other words, if you're giving someone good advice, sincere advice, well thought out, relevant to their circumstances and their context, specifically for them, you've fortified them, which is you've made them into a hisn. Ha, sad, noon. Hisn, it means a fortress. In other words, where there was a hole, there is no longer a hole. That's the purpose of a fort. It's strengthening something to the point that you can't get into it anymore. And that's what your advice has done. It's covered you, it's strengthened you. That's the first thing. That the Imam is telling us that this nasihah, if it's done in a proper way, you're fortifying people. But then he's also telling us something which is manshur an-nasihah. Now why is it important where the Imam says manshur? Because the Imams don't just use words that come to their mind. Someone of the genius of al-Imam al-Ghazālī is well in control of the words that he's using. Manshur in Arabic comes from the word nashara. And nashara in Arabic means to spread. And manshur means something which has been spread. Now think of this for a minute. If I were to give, let's say, Mudassar some advice, Atif some advice, Ma'mun some advice, I'm recognizing immediately that that advice is specific to the three of you. I couldn't now say to myself, let me now publicize this advice. Try to say, without using names, just saying, if someone came to me with X, then you should do this. What I've just said, that the purpose of advice is that it's specific to your context and circumstance, isn't it? So how incredible is it then that if you're looking for advice which is prophetic, it's the only type of advice that can be universalized. Human advice to other humans, it's very rare that you can universalize advice that applies to lots of people. And when the Imam says manshur an-nasihah, that type of advice that's universal for everyone can only come from a prophetic source. It's the only type of advice, which is telling us what? That just as an individual, your context and your circumstances for the particular situation that you're in can be given to you by one person, the Prophet ﷺ is well aware, perfectly aware of the exact things that you need to navigate the world that you're in. And so what's the Imam saying? Look, that's where you need to go. There is nowhere that you can go. And then the third thing that the Imam tells this student of his, وَإِن لَمْ يَبْلُغْكَ فَقُلْ لِمَاذَا حَصَّلْتَ فِي هَذِهِ السِّنِينَ الْمَاضِيَةِ. This is a warning to him. Very kind way, but it's a warning. Because the Imam is telling him that, look, all this time that you've spent studying, are you telling me that you've not come across prophetic counsel that's relevant to everything you need? Because if you haven't, what have you been doing? Because why? The whole purpose of study is to gain proximity. Do you remember when we spoke about this in the retreat a few weeks ago? What did we say? When the Imam says in Ihya Ulumuddin, what's the first book of the Ihya? It's called Kitabul Ilm. Right? What does he mean by Kitabul Ilm? We translate it as a book of knowledge. But what does book of knowledge mean? He tells us, he says that ilm means ilm billah, knowledge of Allah. Wa ilm bi rasulihi alayhi salam, and knowledge of his messenger alayhi salam, and anything that grants you proximity to them. That's it. If you want to say knowledge about other things, then you have to qualify. You have to say al-ilmu bi kadha, that knowledge of X, knowledge of Y. You have to adjectivize it. You need to explain what it is. But if you say kitabul ilm, then what you're saying is knowledge of Allah. Now, why is this important here? Because the Imam is saying to him that if the purpose of you having spent all of those years with me, whether you're studying fiqh, or you're studying usul, or kalam, or logic, if it wasn't gaining proximity, then why were you there? Because even by studying logic, there's proximity. Why? Because you're coming to, you're fascinating yourself by understanding that Allah has given us a mind that functions in a certain way. It has rules that we follow. It has structures that we can recognize, such that we can structure our thinking in the proper way. I mean, just as you train your body for optimal use, exercise and diet and all those things, the mind is the same. The mind has an optimal way that you have to use it. It's just that you don't feed it food, you train it. And that's why Imam al-Ghazālī, he refers to logic in one of his books. He says, mihakkun nazar. And mihak in Arabic is the place that you go and you grind something to make it sharper. Right? You know when you want to sharpen the knife and you go to the grindstone, and you rub it and it becomes sharp. So this book is, if you read this book, it's going to sharpen your intellect. Now, when you look at that, what are you thinking? Oh, that's great. I've been weaponized now. I'm ultra smart and I can engage in all manner of debate and argument with people and undermine people's premises and say, look, I'm more knowledgeable than everyone else because I know how the mind works. Or do you humble yourself in front of Allah? That I have a type of knowledge that must be put into the service. What's the equivalent of that? It's saying, let's train someone to become a warrior, a martial warrior. And they're deadly, completely deadly. And you've given them the sword and everything that they need to do their task. And what do? They end up using it on their own people. It's bizarre, isn't it? You'd never think about that. If someone is training martially to protect their people, would you ever turn around and use your skills on your own people? You wouldn't, would you? Sharpening your mind is weaponizing your mind. Would you use it and deploy it in a way that's actually harming your own people? I.e. not for the benefit of the people, because the warrior is honorable and noble. It doesn't need to show you it has the sword and the scabbard. He doesn't need to tell you how trained he is. Similarly, an alim doesn't need to say, I know this and I've studied this and we're still deploying that knowledge for incorrect purposes. And so that's what the Imam is, the three things he's saying. He starts by addressing his student in a way which is endearing to him. He makes a dua for him, and he immediately goes about setting the frame. Everything that you want to know is within prophetic teaching. And he refers to it as a ma'din, a treasure, right? And if you haven't heard, or you don't think any nasihah has reached you, in fact, first he says that if it has reached you, then you have no need for my nasihah. But if it hasn't reached you, he didn't say, let me now fill you in. He's saying, what have you been doing all of these years? So, I did want to go into the next paragraph, but we'll pause here for today. And we'll continue, because the next paragraph, it's remarkable. It contains 3 hadith. Can you believe that? This one paragraph contains 3 hadith. That's a miracle. Because what's the Imam doing? He's showing you immediately, he's presenting to you now. So once he said that the nasihah is from the prophetic treasure, he's saying, well, here it is. And not only is he giving it to you, he's giving it to you in such a way that if you really thought about it, you'll say, 1 paragraph, 3 hadith. Oh my God, how, this is it, right? So we'll speak about that inshallah next week, and we'll try to sort of do as the sessions allow us. So we'll pause here for any questions inshallah.